He was completely alone in that school library. No one even looked his way. But what happened next left everyone speechless. I still remember the exact moment when everything changed for both of us. Before I continue, if stories like this inspire you, subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss the next ones. My name is Daniel, and I've been a middle school teacher for over 15 years. Throughout my career, I've witnessed countless stories of triumph, failure, and everything in between. But there's one story that stands out above all others: the story of Ethan Parker. Ethan was the kind of student most teachers would overlook, not because he caused trouble, but because he barely made a sound. 12 years old, skinny, with glasses too big for his face and always carrying a worn-out backpack filled with books. While other kids his age were hanging out in groups during lunch breaks, laughing and sharing stories, Ethan would find the most isolated corner of the library and disappear into the world of books. As the new English teacher, I made it my mission to know every single one of my students. Most were easy to figure out: the athletes, the popular kids, the academically gifted. But Ethan, he was a mystery. When I called on him in class, he would answer correctly but so quietly that I'd have to ask him to repeat himself. His written assignments were exceptional, showing a depth of understanding far beyond his years, but he never volunteered to share his thoughts. One day I decided to spend my lunch break in the library. The room was nearly empty except for a few students scattered around. And there he was, Ethan, sitting at a table in the corner, completely absorbed in a book about ancient civilizations. I approached him, trying to strike up a conversation. "That's an interesting choice for someone your age," I said, pointing at his book. He looked up, surprised that someone was talking to him. "I like learning about how people lived in the past," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Their problems were different from ours, but they still had them." That simple observation struck me. Here was a 12-year-old with the insight of someone much older. Before I could respond, the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch break. Ethan quickly packed his things and disappeared into the hallway. Over the next few weeks, I kept an eye on him. In the cafeteria, he ate alone. During group activities, other students would groan when they were paired with him, not because they disliked him, but because they didn't know him. Ethan had become invisible, a ghost moving through the halls of our school. Ms. Reynolds, our school librarian, was the only other adult who seemed to notice him. A kind woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair. She had been at the school longer than most of the teachers. Whenever I stopped by the library, I'd see her recommending books to Ethan or quietly discussing something he'd just read. She later told me that Ethan had read more books that year than most students would in their entire time at the school. Then came that Wednesday in October, a day that would change everything. The weather had turned cold early that year, and most students were staying inside during breaks. The library was more crowded than usual, with kids browsing shelves or huddled around tables working on projects. I was returning some materials when I heard it, a loud, mocking voice cutting through the library's quiet atmosphere. "Hey, look what the freak is reading now. Probably some stupid fairy tale because he lives in a fantasy world." The voice belonged to Tyler Matthews, one of the school's popular kids, tall, athletic, and unfortunately, prone to picking on those he considered beneath him. He was standing over Ethan, who was sitting at his usual table, trying to make himself as small as possible. "What's wrong, weirdo? Can't talk?" Tyler continued, grabbing the book from Ethan's hands. "Maybe if you weren't such a loser, you'd have friends." The other students around them fell silent. Some looked uncomfortable, others seemed amused, but no one intervened. Ms. Reynolds was helping another student in the reference section, unaware of what was happening. I was about to step in when someone else did, someone completely unexpected. Lily Chen, a quiet girl who usually sat in the middle row of my class, stood up from a nearby table. She wasn't part of the popular crowd, but she wasn't an outcast either. She existed somewhere in the middle of the social hierarchy, generally well-liked but not standing out. "Give him back his book, Tyler," she said firmly. Tyler turned, surprised that someone was challenging him. "Mind your own business, Lily. This is between me and the freak." "He has a name," Lily replied, her voice gaining strength. "And he's not bothering anyone. You're the one breaking the library rules." Tyler laughed. "What are you, his girlfriend? I didn't know freaks could date." I was just about to intervene when Ethan did something that surprised everyone, including me. He stood up. "She's not my girlfriend," he said, his voice trembling but audible. "She's just a decent person, something you wouldn't understand." The library fell completely silent. Ethan, the boy who barely spoke above a whisper, had just stood up to the school bully. Tyler's face flushed with anger. He took a step toward Ethan, his hands clenching into fists. "What did you just say to me?" Before Ethan could respond, Ms. Reynolds appeared. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, her kind eyes suddenly sharp. Tyler immediately changed his demeanor. "No, Ms. Reynolds. We were just talking." "It looked more like harassment to me," Ms. Reynolds replied. "Tyler, I think you should go to Principal Warner's office now." Tyler glared at Ethan, then at Lily, before storming out of the library. The tension in the room deflated, and students began to whisper among themselves. Ms. Reynolds placed a gentle hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Are you okay?" Ethan nodded, his moment of courage seemingly used up. He sat back down, his hands trembling slightly. What happened next was just as surprising as Ethan's stand against Tyler. Lily didn't walk away. Instead, she sat down next to Ethan. "That was brave," she said. "You were the brave one," Ethan replied, staring at his hands. "No one's ever stood up for me before." "What were you reading?" Lily asked, changing the subject. Ethan hesitantly showed her the book, The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. "It's about lonely kids who find a hidden place where they can be themselves," he explained. "I know it's for younger kids, but—" "I love that book," Lily interrupted. "My mom used to read it to me when I was little." And just like that, a connection formed. I watched from a distance as these two students who had barely interacted before began discussing their favorite books. It was like witnessing a small miracle. The next day, I half expected things to return to normal. Ethan alone, Lily with her usual friends. But when I passed by the library during lunch, there they were, sitting together, books open in front of them. This continued for weeks, a quiet friendship blooming in the corner of our school library. Occasionally, I'd see them laughing together, their voices hushed to respect the library's atmosphere. Ms. Reynolds kept a watchful eye on them, sometimes joining their conversations or recommending books they might both enjoy. Tyler had received attention for his behavior, but I was concerned he might seek revenge. However, something unexpected happened. After serving his punishment, Tyler seemed to leave Ethan alone. Not out of respect or remorse, but because Ethan was no longer an easy target. He wasn't alone anymore. One afternoon, about a month after the incident, I entered the library to find Ms. Reynolds organizing a display of classic literature. When she saw me, she smiled. "Our young friends have made quite a lot of progress," she said, nodding toward Ethan and Lily, who were huddled over a chessboard. Ms. Reynolds had set up a small chess corner in the library to encourage strategic thinking. "I never thought I'd see Ethan playing chess with anyone," I admitted. "He's always been so withdrawn." Ms. Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to see beyond the surface." "Lily was quite brave to stand up to Tyler like that," I said. "Yes, but don't underestimate Ethan's courage either," Ms. Reynolds replied. "Do you know what he told me the day after the incident? He said he wasn't standing up for himself. He was standing up for Lily because Tyler had turned his attention to her. I was surprised. He was protecting her. That's what he believed he was doing," Ms. Reynolds said with a smile. "Sometimes the ones who seem weakest have the most strength inside. They just need a reason to show it." As winter approached, I noticed more students joining Ethan and Lily in the library. Not many, just a few at first. Another quiet girl named Sophie, a boy named Marcus who was passionate about science fiction. They formed a small group of book lovers, meeting regularly to discuss what they were reading. Ms. Reynolds encouraged them, setting aside a corner of the library with comfortable chairs where they could talk without disturbing others. She called it the Reader's Circle, though the students had jokingly renamed it Ethan's Corner, since he was usually the first to arrive and the last to leave. One day in December, just before winter break, I was grading papers in the teacher's lounge when Ms. Reynolds entered, looking unusually excited. "I need your opinion on something," she said, sitting across from me. "I have an idea for Ethan and his friends, but I want to make sure it's appropriate." She explained that the school's old storage room adjacent to the library had been cleaned out to make space for new equipment. However, the equipment wouldn't arrive until the next school year, leaving the room vacant. "I want to give them a space," she said. "A real place where they can meet, discuss books, maybe even start a proper book club. Principal Warner already approved it, but I wanted to get your thoughts since you know Ethan well." "I think it's a wonderful idea," I replied. "But why not tell them directly?" Ms. Reynolds smiled. "Because I want it to be special. You've seen how Ethan lights up when he talks about the secret garden, a hidden place where lonely children find belonging. I want to recreate that magic for him and his friends. The plan was set. Ms. Reynolds would prepare the room over winter break and reveal it to the students when they returned in January. She asked me to help with some of the preparations, and I happily agreed. During break, we transformed the storage room. We brought in bookshelves, comfortable chairs, a small table, and even a carpet to make the space cozy. Ms. Reynolds had saved old book posters from previous library displays, which we used to decorate the walls. We installed proper lighting and even added plants to brighten the space. The finishing touch was a sign for the door, the secret garden, where books and friendship bloom. It was slightly cheesy, but perfect for middle school students who were just beginning to discover themselves. When school resumed in January, Ms. Reynolds waited for the right moment. The day came when all 5 members of the Reader's Circle were in the library together. I happened to be returning books when Ms. Reynolds approached them. "I have something to show you," she said mysteriously. "Follow me." The students exchanged curious glances, but followed her to the back of the library. Ms. Reynolds stopped in front of a door that most students had probably never noticed before. "Ethan," she said, "would you do the honors?" Confused but intrigued, Ethan stepped forward and opened the door. The look on his face was worth all the effort. His eyes widened, and for a moment he seemed unable to speak. "Is this for us?" he finally managed to ask. "This is your space," Ms. Reynolds confirmed. "Your own secret garden." The students filed into the room, expressions of disbelief and joy on their faces. Lily immediately ran to the bookshelves, examining the titles Ms. Reynolds had carefully selected based on their previous discussions. Sophie sank into one of the comfortable chairs, running her hands over the soft fabric. Marcus examined the small chess table in the corner. "We can use this whenever the library is open," Ms. Reynolds explained. "It's a place for you to discuss books, do homework together, or just spend time with friends who share your interests." Ethan turned to Ms. Reynolds, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Why would you do this for us?" "Because every reader deserves a special place," she replied, "and every person deserves to be seen." I watched from the doorway as Ethan looked around the room once more, then did something completely unexpected. He hugged Ms. Reynolds. It was brief, almost awkward, but sincere. Ms. Reynolds, though surprised, returned the hug, her eyes meeting mine over Ethan's head. The message was clear. This was why we became educators. The secret garden, as it came to be known throughout the school, quickly became more than just a reading room. It became a sanctuary for students who didn't quite fit in elsewhere. The word spread quickly. Other students began asking if they could join. By February, the original group of 5 had grown to 12 regular members. What amazed me most was the diversity of this group. Students from different grades, backgrounds, and social circles, all finding common ground through their love of books. Ethan, who had once been practically invisible, was now at the center of something special, not in a flashy, attention-seeking way, but as a quiet cornerstone. When new students joined, it was often Ethan who made them feel welcome, remembering their reading preferences and suggesting books they might enjoy. The boy who could barely make eye contact a few months earlier was now helping others find their place. If this story has touched you so far, hit like and subscribe to the channel because there are other real and emotional stories that you can't miss. Ms. Reynolds had given them more than just a room. She had given them permission to create their own community, and they took that responsibility seriously. They established routines and traditions, Friday afternoon book recommendations, a monthly theme for their readings, and even a small celebration whenever someone finished a particularly challenging book. One day in March, I noticed something odd. Tyler Matthews, the very same boy who had bullied Ethan months earlier, was lingering outside the secret garden, peering through the small window in the door. When he saw me watching, he quickly walked away. This happened several times over the next few weeks. Tyler watching from a distance, never approaching but clearly interested. I mentioned this to Ms. Reynolds, concerned that he might be planning some kind of revenge. "I've noticed too," she said, "but I don't think it's malicious. I think he's curious." "Should we be worried?" I asked. Ms. Reynolds considered the question. "Let's wait and see. Sometimes people surprise us." The surprise came sooner than expected. One Tuesday afternoon, while the Reader's Circle was having an animated discussion about mythology, There was a knock on the door of the secret garden. The room fell silent as Ethan, who was closest to the door, opened it. Tyler stood there, looking uncomfortable, a book clutched in his hands. Is this where the book club meets?" he asked, his confident demeanor nowhere to be seen. The tension in the room was palpable. Everyone remembered the library incident. Even those who hadn't been there had heard about it. Ethan stood frozen, unsure how to respond. Lily was the first to break the silence. "Yes, we're discussing Greek myths today. Do you want to join?" Tyler nodded, avoiding eye contact with everyone, especially Ethan. "Ms. Reynolds said I could, if it's okay with all of you." All eyes turned to Ethan. As the unofficial leader of the group, it was his call. I held my breath, watching from where I stood next to Ms. Reynolds near the library's reference section. Ethan looked at Tyler for a long moment, then stepped aside. "There's an empty chair over there," he said, pointing to a spot in the circle. The relief on Tyler's face was evident. He quickly took the seat, still clutching his book, a worn copy of Percy Jackson and the Olympians. The discussion resumed, slightly stilted at first, but gradually returning to its normal flow. Tyler remained quiet throughout, just listening. After the meeting, as students were gathering their things, I saw Ethan approach Tyler. "Why did you come today?" Ethan asked directly, his voice low but steady. Tyler looked around to make sure no one else was listening, then replied, "I like these books too. Always have, but I never told anyone." "Why not?" Tyler shrugged. "Not exactly cool, is it? Reading fantasy books about Greek gods? And bullying kids for reading is cool?" Ethan challenged, a flash of the courage he'd shown months ago returning. Tyler had the decency to look ashamed. "I've been a jerk. I know that. My parents, they're getting divorced, and I've been angry about everything. Not an excuse, just..." He trailed off. Ethan was silent for a moment. "You can come back tomorrow if you want," he finally said. "But no making fun of anyone. This is a safe place." Tyler nodded, something like gratitude in his expression. "Thanks." As they parted ways, Ms. Reynolds appeared beside me. "Forgiveness is a powerful thing," she observed. "Do you think he means it?" I asked. "Or is this some kind of trick?" "Time will tell," she replied. "But did you notice something? When Tyler was explaining himself, he wasn't looking at me or you or the other kids. He was looking at Ethan. He wanted Ethan's forgiveness specifically. I hadn't noticed that, but Ms. Reynolds was right. For whatever reason, Tyler seemed to genuinely care what Ethan thought of him. The inclusion of Tyler into the group wasn't smooth at first. Some members were wary, others openly hostile. But Ethan's acceptance set the tone. If he could give Tyler a second chance, so could they. And gradually Tyler began to show a different side of himself. Thoughtful, occasionally funny, and surprisingly knowledgeable about mythology. By April, a remarkable transformation had occurred. The secret garden was flourishing with around 20 regular members. They had started organizing small events, poetry readings, book exchanges, even a miniature theatrical performance based on a short story they all loved. Ms. Reynolds guided them with a light touch, providing resources and suggestions but allowing the students to lead. Ethan and Lily had become the unofficial coordinators, working together to ensure everyone felt included. Their friendship had deepened too, though in the way of middle schoolers it remained safely in the realm of best friends rather than anything romantic. One afternoon, as the school year was winding down, Principal Warner visited the secret garden during a meeting. The students fell silent as he entered, intimidated by his presence. Principal Warner was fair but strict, and many students only interacted with him when they were in trouble. "Please don't stop on my account," he said, taking a seat in the corner. "I just wanted to see what all the fuss was about. Ms. Reynolds hasn't stopped talking about this group for months." Tentatively, the discussion resumed, focusing on the coming-of-age novel they had all been reading. As the students became more comfortable with Principal Warner's presence, they forgot their initial nervousness and returned to their passionate debate about the protagonist's choices. After about 20 minutes, Principal Warner stood up. "Thank you for letting me observe," he said. "I'm impressed with what you've created here." Before he left, he pulled me and Ms. Reynolds aside. "This is exactly the kind of program our school needs," he said. "I'd like to make it official next year. Proper funding, a faculty advisor, maybe even field trips to literary events." Ms. Reynolds beamed. "That would be wonderful." And Principal Warner added, I'd like Ethan and Lily to present the club at our back-to-school assembly in September. Do you think they'd be up for it? I looked over at Ethan, who was enthusiastically explaining something to a sixth grader who had recently joined the group. Ethan speaking in front of the whole school? That would have been unthinkable a few months ago. People grow when we give them the space to do so, Principal Warner said. Just think about it. After he left, Ms. Reynolds and I discussed the proposal. The idea of Ethan speaking at an assembly was both exciting and concerning. Would it put too much pressure on him? Would it draw unwanted attention? We decided to present the opportunity to Ethan and Lily together, making it clear that they could decline if they weren't comfortable. We called them to the library after school the following day. The principal was very impressed with what you've accomplished here, Ms. Reynolds began. All of us have accomplished it, Ethan corrected, a new confidence in his voice that still surprised me sometimes. Yes, of course, I agreed, but you and Lily have been the heart of this group from the beginning. That's why Principal Warner has a special request. We explained the proposal, the club becoming official, the presentation at the assembly. Lily immediately looked excited, but Ethan's face clouded with anxiety. In front of everyone, he asked quietly, I don't know if I can do that. You don't have to decide right now, Ms. Reynolds assured him. And you certainly don't have to do it if you're not comfortable. Lily looked at Ethan with understanding. We could do it together, she suggested. I could do most of the talking if you want. Ethan shook his head. It's not fair to make you do all the work. Let me think about it. For the next week, Ethan was quieter than usual. He still attended every meeting, still helped coordinate activities, but there was a thoughtfulness about him, as if he was wrestling with a difficult decision. Then, on the last day of school, as the Readers' Circle held their final meeting of the year, Ethan made an announcement. I want to do the presentation, he said, his voice shaky but determined. I want to tell everyone about this place and what it means to me, to all of us. The group erupted in cheers and supportive comments. Lily hugged him, and even Tyler gave him an approving nod. After the meeting, as students exchanged phone numbers and promised to stay in touch over the summer, Ms. Reynolds presented each member with a small gift, a bookmark with a quote from a book they had discussed, personalized for each student. When she came to Ethan, she handed him a small box instead. This is something special, she said, a thank you for helping create such a wonderful community. Ethan opened the box carefully. Inside was an old-fashioned key on a simple chain. It's symbolic, of course, Ms. Reynolds explained. The actual key to the room stays with me. But this represents what you've done here. You've unlocked a space where people can be themselves. Ethan stared at the key, emotion welling in his eyes. Thank you, he whispered, for everything. That summer was the first in years that Ethan didn't spend entirely alone. Lily, Tyler, and several other members of the Readers' Circle would meet regularly at the public library or local park. They had created a group chat to discuss books they were reading and to plan activities for the coming school year. Ms. Reynolds, who lived just a few blocks from the school, would occasionally invite them to her home for special reading events. Her backyard garden became a summer version of their secret garden, a place of safety, friendship, and shared passion for stories. I stayed in touch with Ethan too, suggesting books I thought he might enjoy and asking for his recommendations in return. His emails grew longer and more confident as the summer progressed, full of insights about characters and themes that impressed me even as his teacher. In one email, he wrote something that particularly struck me. Before this year, I thought being invisible was better than being seen. Being invisible meant no one could hurt you. But Ms. Reynolds taught me that being truly seen, not for who others want you to be, but for who you really are, that's the best feeling in the world. When September arrived and a new school year began, the Secret Garden was officially listed in the school's club directory. Students who had never heard of it before were curious, especially after Principal Warner mentioned it specifically in his welcome address. The day of the assembly came quickly. Ethan and Lily had spent weeks preparing their presentation, meeting at each other's houses to practice. I helped them create a simple slideshow with photos of the Secret Garden and quotes from books that had been meaningful to the group. As the assembly began, I could see Ethan sitting in the front row, nervously fidgeting with the key that hung around his neck. Ms. Reynolds sat beside him, occasionally leaning over to offer reassuring words. When Principal Warner called them to the stage, Lily bounded up confidently, but Ethan moved more hesitantly. They stood side by side at the microphone, facing hundreds of their peers and all the school's faculty. Lily began the presentation, her clear voice explaining how the club had started and what activities they enjoyed. Then she turned to Ethan, giving him an encouraging nod. Ethan stepped forward, his hands trembling slightly. He looked out at the sea of faces, and for a moment I thought he might freeze. Then his hand went to the key around his neck, and something seemed to steady him. "Last year at this time," he began, his voice quiet but audible thanks to the microphone, "I had no friends. I spent every lunch period alone in the library, hiding in books because reality was too hard to face. The auditorium was completely silent, every student listening intently. I thought that was just how life would always be for me." Ethan continued, his voice growing stronger, "until one day someone stood up for me when I couldn't stand up for myself." He glanced at Lily, who smiled encouragingly. "That one act of kindness changed everything," Ethan said. "It showed me that I wasn't invisible after all. Someone saw me, really saw me." Ethan went on to describe the secret garden, not just as a physical space, but as a community where everyone was valued for exactly who they were. He explained how Ms. Reynolds had created the space, but how the students themselves had built the community within it. "What I've learned," he said, approaching the end of his speech, "is that everyone has something valuable to share. Everyone deserves to be heard, and sometimes the quietest voice in the room has the most important thing to say." As he finished, there was a moment of silence. Then the auditorium erupted in applause. Students were standing, teachers were wiping away tears, and Principal Warner was nodding with clear approval. After the assembly, students flocked around Ethan and Lily, asking questions about joining the club. The sign-up sheet they had prepared quickly filled up with names, far more than the secret garden could accommodate at once. "What are we going to do?" Lily asked, looking overwhelmed by the response. "There's not enough space for everyone." Ethan thought for a moment, then turned to Ms. Reynolds, who had joined them. "What if we had multiple meeting times, different groups on different days?" Ms. Reynolds smiled. "That's a wonderful solution. We can organize different themed groups, one for fantasy lovers, another for mysteries, perhaps one for classics." Tyler, who had been standing nearby, stepped forward. "And what if older students led some of the groups, like mentors or something?" The idea took hold immediately. By the end of that first week, the Secret Garden had expanded into a multifaceted program with different groups meeting throughout the week. Ethan, Lily, and several other original members took on leadership roles, mentoring younger students and helping coordinate the various activities. The key that Ms. Reynolds had given Ethan became something of a symbol. Some students started wearing similar keys representing their connection to the group. It wasn't about exclusivity, anyone could join, but about belonging, about finding the key to your own identity through stories shared with others. As the months passed, I watched Ethan continue to grow. His academic performance, already strong, improved even further. He began participating more in class discussions, raising his hand to share insights that often surprised his classmates. The change wasn't just in his confidence, but in his entire demeanor. He walked taller, smiled more often, and developed a quiet sense of humor that occasionally emerged in unexpected moments. One particularly memorable day came in November, about a year after the incident that had started everything. I was passing by the cafeteria during lunch when I noticed Ethan sitting at a table with several other students, including Lily, and surprisingly Tyler. They were laughing together about something, completely at ease in each other's company. What struck me most wasn't just that Ethan had friends, it was that he had become the kind of person other students gravitated toward. Not because he was loud or flashy or tried to impress anyone, but because he was genuinely interested in others, in their stories and perspectives. Later that day, I stopped by the library to return some books and found Ms. Reynolds sorting through a stack of new arrivals. She looked up as I approached, a knowing smile on her face. "You saw them in the cafeteria, didn't you?" she asked. I nodded. "It's remarkable. Sometimes I have to remind myself that this is the same boy who couldn't look anyone in the eye last year." Ms. Reynolds set aside the book she was holding. "Do you know what Ethan told me yesterday? He's thinking about starting a writing club next year. Not just reading books, but creating their own stories." "That's ambitious," I said, impressed but not entirely surprised. Ethan's writing assignments had shown considerable creativity throughout the year. "That's what happens when you give someone the right kind of space," Ms. Reynolds replied. They don't just grow, they bloom. As winter approached, the Readers' Circle organized their first major event, a book drive for the children's ward at the local hospital. Ethan had come up with the idea after learning that his cousin had spent several weeks in that same hospital the previous year, with very little to keep her occupied during her stay. The students created posters, made announcements, and set up collection boxes throughout the school. Their goal was to collect 100 books by the winter break. They ended up with over 300. On the day they delivered the books to the hospital, I volunteered to drive some of the students, including Ethan and Lily. The hospital staff had arranged for them to spend some time with the children, reading stories aloud and helping them select books to keep by their bedsides. Watching Ethan sit beside a young boy's hospital bed, patiently reading a chapter of Harry Potter, I felt a lump form in my throat. This boy, who had once been so withdrawn that he could barely function in social situations, was now confidently bringing joy to others through stories. As we drove back to school, Ethan was unusually quiet, staring out the window at the snow-covered streets. "Is everything okay?" I asked, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. He nodded slowly. "I was just thinking about last year, about how different everything was." "You've come a long way," I agreed. "It's not just me," Ethan said thoughtfully. "It's like Ms. Reynolds gave me something, and now I can give it to other people too." "What's that?" I asked, though I had a feeling I knew the answer. "The feeling that you matter," Ethan replied simply, "that your voice deserves to be heard." The winter break came and went, and when we returned to school in January, something unexpected happened. Ms. Reynolds announced that she would be retiring at the end of the school year. After 35 years as a librarian, 20 of them at our school, she felt it was time to pass the torch. The news hit the Readers' Circle hard, particularly Ethan. Ms. Reynolds had been more than just a librarian to him. She had been a mentor, a guide, the first adult who had truly seen his potential. The thought of continuing without her was difficult to imagine. In the weeks that followed, there was a subtle change in the atmosphere of the secret garden. The meetings continued as usual, but there was an undertone of sadness, a sense of approaching loss. One afternoon, I found Ethan alone in the secret garden, sitting quietly with a book open in his lap, though he wasn't reading it. When he saw me, he quickly wiped his eyes. "Sorry," he mumbled. "I was just thinking." I sat down across from him. "About Ms. Reynolds?" He nodded. "I don't know what this place will be like without her. What if the new librarian doesn't want to continue the program? What if everything we built just disappears?" It was a valid concern. The secret garden, while now officially recognized by the school, had been Ms. Reynolds' special project. There was no guarantee that her replacement would share her vision. "Have you talked to Ms. Reynolds about this?" I asked. "I tried, but I didn't want to make her feel bad about retiring. She deserves to enjoy her life after giving so much to all of us." I considered his words. "What if you could find a way to ensure the program continues regardless of who the new librarian is?" Ethan looked up, interested. "How?" "That's something you and the others would need to figure out," I said. "But I think Principal Warner would be open to your ideas. The program has been very successful." That conversation sparked something in Ethan. Over the next few days, he held meetings with Lily, Tyler, and other core members of the Readers' Circle. They researched similar programs at other schools, compiled data on the impact their club had made, and drafted a proposal for making the Secret Garden a permanent institution at the school. Their proposal included detailed plans for student leadership, faculty oversight, budget requirements, and a clear mission statement emphasizing inclusivity and the power of literature to build community. They even created a handbook for future members, preserving the traditions and values that had made the group special. When they presented their plan to Principal Warner, he was visibly impressed. "This is remarkably thorough," he said, flipping through the binder they had prepared. "Most adults couldn't have created something this comprehensive." "It's important to us," Ethan explained. "We want to make sure what Ms. Reynolds started doesn't end when she leaves." Principal Warner nodded thoughtfully. "I'll need to review this in detail, but I'm inclined to approve it. The program has had a positive impact on student engagement and community building." The relief on Ethan's face was evident. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet," Principal Warner replied with a small smile. "If I approve this, it means a lot of responsibility for you and your fellow students. Are you prepared for that?" Ethan straightened in his chair. "We are." True to his word, Principal Warner approved the proposal 2 weeks later with only minor adjustments. The Secret Garden would continue as a permanent program, with a dedicated faculty advisor and student leadership council. Ms. Reynolds would help select her successor and ensure they understood the importance of the program. The news spread quickly through the school, and a weight seemed to lift from the readers' circle. They could now focus on honoring Ms. Reynolds' legacy rather than worrying about the future of their beloved space. As the end of the school year approached, the students decided to organize a special farewell celebration for Ms. Reynolds. They planned it in secret, coordinating with me and other sympathetic teachers to ensure it would be a surprise. They transformed the Secret Garden for the occasion, decorating it with fairy lights and paper flowers. They created a scrapbook filled with photos and personal messages from every member. They even contacted former students who had worked with Ms. Reynolds over the years, collecting letters and messages of appreciation. On the day of the surprise, I was tasked with bringing Ms. Reynolds to the library under some pretense. As we walked through the school, I felt a mixture of excitement and nostalgia. This woman had changed so many lives, including mine. Her approach to education, seeing the potential in each student and creating spaces where they could flourish, had influenced my own teaching philosophy profoundly. When we entered the library, everything was quiet. I led her toward the Secret Garden, mentioning casually that some students had a question about a book they were discussing. As she opened the door, the room erupted in cheers and applause. "Surprise!" Ms. Reynolds stood frozen in the doorway, her hand pressed to her heart. The room was filled with current and former students, colleagues, and even some parents who had heard about the impact she had made. "What is all this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Ethan stepped forward, the key she had given him still hanging around his neck. "It's a thank you," he said simply, "for everything you've done for us, for me." What followed was an afternoon of stories, laughter, and more than a few tears. Students shared how Ms. Reynolds had influenced them, how she had helped them discover not just books but parts of themselves they hadn't known existed. When it was Ethan's turn to speak, he stood in front of the group, no longer the shy boy who could barely make eye contact. "Before I met Ms. Reynolds, I thought libraries were just places to hide," he began. "Places where quiet kids like me could disappear into books and not have to face the real world." He fingered the key around his neck. "But Ms. Reynolds showed me that libraries aren't just about books, they're about connections. Between stories and readers, between past and present, between people who might never have found each other otherwise." His voice grew stronger. "When she gave me this key, she told me it was symbolic, that the actual key to the room stays with her. But the truth is, she's been giving us keys all along. Keys to understand ourselves, to unlock our potential, to open doors we didn't even know existed." Ethan turned to face Ms. Reynolds directly. "You won't be our librarian anymore, but what you've given us can never be taken away. It's in every book we read, every story we share, every new member who finds a home in our little garden." By the time he finished speaking, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Ms. Reynolds embraced him, too moved to speak at first. When she finally found her voice, she addressed the entire group. "When I became a librarian all those years ago, I hoped to share my love of books with young people," she said. "What I never expected was how much you would all teach me, about courage, resilience, and the extraordinary capacity young people have for growth and compassion." She looked around the room, her gaze lingering on Ethan. "This room, this garden you've all created together, is the greatest achievement of my career. Not because of anything I did, but because of what you all did with the opportunity. You took a simple idea and transformed it into something magical." The celebration continued into the evening, with food and music and countless stories being shared. As it began to wind down, I found Ethan and Ms. Reynolds sitting together in a quiet corner of the room. "Have you decided what you're going to do after graduation next year?" Ms. Reynolds was asking him. Ethan nodded. "I want to study education, maybe even library science eventually. I want to do what you did, create spaces where people can find themselves." Ms. Reynolds smiled, her eyes glistening. "You already have," she said, gesturing around the room. "This is just the beginning." And she was right. The Secret Garden continued to thrive after her retirement. The new librarian, a young woman with innovative ideas and a deep respect for what had been built, embraced the program wholeheartedly. Under her guidance and with the continued leadership of students like Ethan and Lily, the program expanded even further. By the time Ethan graduated the following year, the Readers' Circle had over 50 regular members across multiple groups. The writing club he had proposed was up and running, producing a quarterly literary magazine featuring student work. The annual book drive had become a school-wide tradition, collecting hundreds of books for various community organizations. At his graduation ceremony, Ethan was recognized with a special award for his contributions to school culture. As he accepted it, he wore the key Ms. Reynolds had given him, now attached to his graduation tassel. In his brief acceptance speech, he said something that has stayed with me ever since. 2 years ago, a librarian gave me a key and told me it was symbolic. Today I understand what it really meant. It wasn't a key to a room. It was a key to myself, to the person I could become if I was brave enough to be seen. Ms. Reynolds, seated in the audience as a special guest, beamed with pride. The shy, invisible boy she had noticed reading alone in her library had become a confident young man who had changed an entire school culture. After the ceremony, as families and friends mingled on the school lawn, I watched Ethan introduce Ms. Reynolds to his parents. The former librarian embraced them warmly, no doubt sharing stories of their son's remarkable journey. Later, as I was preparing to leave, Ethan approached me. "I wanted to thank you too," he said, "for helping with the secret garden, for encouraging me." "You did all the hard work," I replied. I just watched in amazement. He smiled, a far cry from the hesitant, barely there smile I remembered from 2 years earlier. "I'm going to miss this place," he admitted, "but I'm ready for what's next." "Keep in touch," I said. "Let me know how college goes." "I will," he promised, "and maybe someday I'll have my own library, my own secret garden to share with students who need it." I had no doubt he would. As I watched him rejoin his friends, Lily, Tyler, and others from the Readers' Circle who had become like family to him, I thought about how profoundly one person can change another's life. Ms. Reynolds had seen potential in a shy, lonely boy. She had given him a space where he could feel safe, a key that symbolized his worth, and he had taken that gift and multiplied it, creating a community that changed not just his life, but dozens of others. Today, 5 years later, Ethan is completing his degree in education with a minor in library science. He stays in touch, occasionally sending me updates on his progress. In his last email, he mentioned that he's been offered a position at an inner-city school with a struggling library program. His goal is to create a secret garden there, a space where students who feel invisible can be seen, where they can find their voice and their community through stories. The key Ms. Reynolds gave him still hangs in his apartment, framed alongside a photo of the original Readers' Circle. It serves as a daily reminder of where he came from and what he hopes to achieve. As for Ms. Reynolds, she's enjoying her retirement, but still mentors young librarians in her spare time. She visited Ethan's college last year to hear him present his thesis on creating inclusive literary spaces for marginalized youth. According to Ethan, she cried during his presentation, recognizing the seeds of what she had planted years ago. Sometimes I think about that day in the library, when a quiet boy stood up to a bully, finding courage he didn't know he possessed. How that one moment, that one decision to speak instead of remain silent, set in motion a chain of events that would transform so many lives. It reminds me why I became a teacher in the first place, to witness these transformations, these moments when a student discovers their own voice and power, to create environments where such discoveries are possible. The secret garden at our school continues to this day, now housed in a larger space as the program has grown. New students learn the story of how it began, of Ethan, Lily, and Ms. Reynolds, passing down the tradition like a cherished folktale. The current members still wear symbolic keys, though the design has evolved over the years. What hasn't changed is the fundamental promise of the space, that every person deserves to be seen, that every voice matters, that stories have the power to connect us in ways nothing else can. In my 20 years of teaching, I've witnessed many remarkable student journeys, but Ethan's story remains special to me, a reminder of the extraordinary impact one person can have when they choose courage over fear, connection over isolation. It's also a reminder of the power we all hold as educators, the power to notice the quiet ones, to create spaces where they can flourish, to offer symbolic keys that open very real doors. So when I see a student sitting alone, lost in a book, I think of Ethan, and I remember that sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply to see someone, truly see them, and create a space where they can begin to see themselves. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and comment below which part moved you the most. And before you go, there's a recommended video right next to this one that will give you goosebumps. Watch it now. What part of this story resonated with you most? Have you ever been the one to stand up for someone who couldn't stand up for themselves?